you should vacate the building in an orderly manner through the nearest available exit and make your way to the car park at the side of the building. Can I ask that the live stream is started and verbal confirmation provided?
I confirm, Chair, that we're now live streaming.
All right. Welcome to the meeting of the Planning and Regulatory Committee. The agenda, papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for the public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. Please remember your words and actions should be chosen carefully, and members are reminded that speeches are limited to 3 minutes. The Council is streaming the meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record the meeting, provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please identify yourself so that anyone who intends to record the meeting can be made aware. No one? To ensure that the recording quality is maintained, could members please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum, and ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Welcome to all those in attendance. I now ask Mrs. Gibbons to introduce the officers.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Kelly Gibbons. I'm the Service Manager for the Development Management team. To my right, we have Simon Withers, who will be presenting item 6, which is the only item for consideration today. And to my left, I have Georgina Coley, who's the legal advisor. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start now with item 1, apologies for absence. We have Councillor Jackie Carwadine, who's had to go to take someone to surgery at US Herald, of all places. Right. Name substitutes. I don't think there's anybody acting as a substitute. We're all the committee members here. Declarations of interest. Are there anyone who wishes to indicate a declaration? None? Then we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of August 2024. Are the minutes of the meeting on the 21st of August 2004 approved? Please can members raise their hand. Those who approve. Anyone against? And I assume there's 1 or 2 abstentions. Right. There are no chairman's announcements other than to say that at the end of this particular item, we have to consider, we will have a 10-minute adjournment and we'll come back to have a brief update on appeals and any other business that members wish to raise following this meeting. Right. Can I request that the public speakers present in person for the agenda item 6 join the meeting? Mrs. Tribe, Mrs. Griffiths and Mr. Gardner, please can you take your seats in the public gallery, please? Good morning, and I welcome you to the meeting, and will call you to speak after the officers have made the presentation. Right, we'll now move on to the first application and only application in this meeting. Aubrey's to the west of Mountain Road, Lanoy, Longtown, Herefordshire. Can I ask Mr. Banks, who will make the presentation? Mr. Withers, sorry.
Good morning, Councillor, and thank you, Councillor James, for introducing the item, which can be broadly summarised as the reinstatement and extension of the farmhouse and associated farm buildings, the erection of an ancillary garage workshop, the formation of an access track from the existing field gate, and associated landscaping and biodiversity enhancements. I trust that councillors were able to make what was a very well attended site visit yesterday, found it beneficial, and were able to fully appreciate the character and condition of the buildings, as well as the qualities of the landscape context in which they are positioned. Before I move on to my presentation, I would like to draw councillors' attention to the written schedule of updates. There you will see reference to 5 further representations received since the publication of the report. In part, these concerns reiterate those that have been summarised in your report as prepared, but I wanted to particularly draw attention to the third-party application submitted to Historic England for the proposed listing of the Albury's farmstead, and also the comments that were received from Herefordshire Wildlife Trust. In relation to the listing, the Council has subsequently received confirmation that this application for listing has been acknowledged by Historic England. It has a reference number 1491683. Having sought legal advice on the matter, the weight that the decision maker gives to that potential listing is a matter for your consideration. However, it is officer's opinion that since the application is at a very early stage, and that based on the correspondence we've had with Historic England, they fully respect the Council's right to make a decision here today. It's considered that one should give that very limited weight, and there is no reason why, as a committee, you cannot make a decision on this planning application today. With regards to the comments from the Herefordshire Wildlife Trust, there have been further exchanges both with the applicant and the Council's ecologist. As a result of that, I can confirm the Council's ecologist continues to offer conditional support based on the supporting documentation and, importantly, the various updated assessments that were provided through the processing of the application most recently in June 2024. And for the avoidance of doubt, I can confirm that there is no loss of irreplaceable habitat associated with the proposed development. Finally, before I move to the presentation, I did want to point out that importantly, the decision that was made in respect of the previous application for a similarly described proposal at this site is a material consideration that should be afforded significant weight in your officer's view. The reasons for refusal of that previous application are set out in full in your report, but in brief relate to the scale of the new build barn, the scale of the alterations to the farmhouse and the farmstead, the visual impact of the access track, and the biodiversity impacts of the proposal, which previously had attracted an objection from our ecologist. In this regard, I simply wanted to make it clear that to councillors that the general principle of restoring the farmhouse and the farmstead was and remains supported, having regard to the policies of the adopted development plan. So moving on to the slides. Slide 1, as is customary, the location of the application site is demarked with the red star. It's located at the northern end of the Olcan Valley, approximately 150 metres upslope and to the west of the mountain road, which loops back at the head of the valley back towards Lambenow and Longtown. To the west of the site lies the Hatterall Ridge, the Offers Dyke Path and the boundary with the Brecon Beacons National Park, and to the east is the Cat's Back. Next slide, please. This slide shows the red line boundary of the application site, which extends to some 2.64 hectares. The bottom image, I hope, provides an appreciation of the position of the farmstead in relation to the existing field pattern to the east and north of the built form. Although having no formal landscape designation, it is undoubtedly highly sensitive, and the scenic qualities of the surrounding landscape are incredibly special, and I'm sure that won't have been lost on the councillors who were able to attend the meeting yesterday. Next slide, please. This is the existing block plan, which shows the roughly L-shaped layout of the Albury's farmstead, with the derelict farmhouse to the left-hand side of the slide, and the farm buildings described within the submission as the threshing barn, the cow house, and the hay barn, running from top to bottom to the right-hand side of the farmhouse. Next slide, please. The following two slides illustrate the existing condition of the farmhouse and the farm buildings, with this one focused on the farmhouse itself. As can be seen, the farmhouse, with the exception of a collapsed section of roof, remains largely intact, although it is clearly in a dilapidated state. Next slide, please. The threshing barn, the cow house and the hay barn are in poorer condition and essentially without roofs, with elements of the existing stonework also in a state of considerable disrepair. Clearly, councillors who were able to attend the site inspection yesterday will have first-hand knowledge of the condition of the buildings, but there are some photographs later in the presentation that will provide a better understanding of their current condition. Thank you. Next slide. Moving on now to the proposed development. This slide shows the proposed block plan, where you can see illustrated the intention to provide a single-storey addition across the back of the farmhouse to link to the threshing barn, and then through a series of additions and linking structures to assimilate the threshing barn, the cow house and the hay barn into a single form, providing extended 3-bed living accommodation. The slide also shows the position of the detached garage workshop to the north of the farmstead, as well as the part of the access track, the top part of the access track as it bends round onto that level contour. I'd ask councillors to note in this slide the presence of the established landscaping features which introduce natural screening to the new build elements of and restrict views from the wider landscape. Thank you. Next slide. This slide depicts the ground and first floor layout of the farmhouse and farm buildings. Again, I trust this clarifies how the farmhouse and buildings will be integrated, with the exception of the first floor accommodation within the farmhouse itself and the threshing barn at the rear of the complex. The additional elements and restored buildings, whilst of varying heights, are all of single-storey scale. Thank you. Next slide. In terms of elevations, this slide focuses on the farmhouse, where one can see the nature of the single-storey structure attached to the rear of the building. It's worth noting at this stage that in response to a number of discussions and officers' advice, the extent of the extension projecting to the beyond the south elevation to the side of the farmhouse has been reduced during the consideration of the application. This is intended really to minimise the visual presence of additions when looking upslope from the access to the field. The slide also shows the intention to provide a lightweight glazed structure between the farmhouse and the threshing barn to reflect the separation between these structures as is existing. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed elevations for the treatment of the farm buildings, with the taller threshing barn at the rear of the site. You'll see the scale of the buildings varies, dropping down with the contours of the site to the front forward projecting hay barn. I think members who were on the site will appreciate that there is a significant drop from front to back of the site with the existing farmhouse cut in to the landscape and a fairly significant slope through the site. Thank you. Next slide. This slide provides details of the proposed garage and workshop. With particular reference to refusal reason 1 of the previous application, the comparative floor areas and heights are shown on this slide, which are indicated with the red line. This, in your officer's view, is considered to represent a significant reduction in the size of the ancillary structure, such that, in your officer's view, it may now be regarded as a genuinely subservient addition to the group of buildings, unlike the situation with the previous proposals. Thank you. Next slide. Difficult to summarise the landscape and biodiversity aspects of this application in a clear way, but a significant part of the proposal relates to the landscape and biodiversity strategy, which is broadly set out on the slide before you now. The proposal is designed to minimise the loss of existing landscape features. In particular, the route of the access track makes use of existing gaps in the trees adjacent to the watercourses. And I would say at this point that despite suggestions to the contrary at the site visit yesterday, The supporting documents confirm that no trees are required to be removed as a result of these works, although pollarding and cutting back is proposed in order to achieve the space required to deliver the access through the field boundaries. The landscape proposals include a significant amount of native species hedgerow planting to supplement those existing field boundaries, wildflower meadow planting, and a significant commitment to woodland and understory planting to the west of the proposed garden area, to the rear of the farmhouse. Of note, in your officer's view, is that although not a mandatory requirement, given the timing of this application, the submission is very much based on the principles of securing a significant biodiversity net gain, which, in addition to the planting proposals arises primarily from the establishment and long-term management of a proposed lowland meadow habitat across the wider site. For clarity, councillors will note from my report that the Senior Landscape Officer still objects to the application by reason of the scale of development proposed, and in particular the impact of the proposed track access. However, the proposed biodiversity enhancements have now secured the conditional support of the council's ecologist. Next slide, please. The following slides deal with the access and its design. So the route and design of the access track have been the subject of much discussion, and it is considered that the response to the refuse scheme as presented here is a positive one. Utilising the existing field access, the track runs close to the lower field boundary before crossing a watercourse about halfway upslope from the road. It crosses into the second field, which some councillors were able to access yesterday, which is considered to be a visually less prominent location on site. Before cutting across that field and then arriving to the side, to the northern side of the farm buildings. The second field, as members will be aware, is part of a larger designated special wildlife site. However, officers feel that taking the particular constraints of the site into account and acknowledging that there is policy support for a high quality reinstatement of the farmstead, it's considered that the route does strike an acceptable balance between the desire to preserve the more prominent setting of the farmhouse in views directly upslope from the field entrance, in combination with what is considered to be a well evidenced and positive biodiversity enhancement plan. Next slide, please. This slide shows the detailed design of the access, and here the intention is for the establishment of a 2.5 metre wide single width twin track access, which is considered to be fairly typical of what might be utilised for agricultural purposes in the valley. In this regard, the combination of the route and the design approach is considered to represent a visually the least visually impactful option for providing access to the restored buildings. Next slide, please. So the following slides are a series of photographs of the site and the surrounding locality, with this one focused on the existing farmhouse and buildings. Clockwise from top left, we have views of the farmhouse and then the forward projecting hay barn. Then a view from the rear of the farmhouse with the cat's back in the background. And then finally, bottom left there, a site photo looking southwards towards the side elevations of the threshing barn, cow house and hay barn. Next slide, please. This series of images is intended to highlight the location of the track access. So from top left again, running clockwise, we have a view upslope from the existing field access, then a photo depicting the lower part of the field through which the first section of the track will run. Then the position of the, bottom left then is the position of the track where it first crosses the watercourse, and then the bottom right is a view of the second field where the access will run diagonally across, crossing a second watercourse before then bending up and arriving at the parking courtyard. Thank you. Next slide. These slides illustrate the location of the garage workshop and the parking courtyard, with the top left slide being the position at which the track will emerge from the lower field. Then clockwise views looking north from the parking area where one can see the existing vegetation, and then a view looking south, sorry, get that right, a view looking south from the same point, showing the relationship of the parking courtyard and new build to the farm buildings themselves. Finally, there's a view there of looking down slope from in front of the farmhouse down towards the proposed point of access, with again the cat's back in the background. Final photograph, I think, yes. So this slide highlights the naturally open verge, allowing for plenty of forward visibility and no requirements to make any further changes to the visibility displays at the access to the site. Apologies, there is one more slide of photos. It's not the greatest, so I apologise for the resolution, but that is a view, from my point of view, the best view that one gets from the other side of the mountain road. There may well be other vantage points, but this is the one that I found to be the most obvious in terms of being able to pick out the group on the slopes of the hillside there. At this point, I might add that in response to a comment yesterday, the senior landscape officer was clearly not agreeing with the scale and impact identified in the landscape statement provided by the applicant, does accept that the viewpoint analysis that is provided with the application is appropriately represented. And then I think this is my final slide. So yes. So finally then, in summarising this presentation, one has to acknowledge that the application has generated a high level of public interest, and that was evident at the site meeting yesterday. However, it is maintained that the principle of the reinstatement of the farmhouse and associated buildings is one that is supported by policy LGPC4 of the Longtown Group Neighbourhood Development Plan. Indeed, a number of the comments received are broadly supportive of this, albeit they do go on to amount to strong objections based upon the scale and impact of the development as proposed. The apparent tension between this policy and those focused more on the conversion of outbuildings has been highlighted in the report, but the advice to councillors is that, in your office's view, the terms of policy LGPC4 would allow for more significant works for the reinstatement of the historic farmsteads, and Albury's is identified as one of those in the neighbourhood development plan. Furthermore, the late submission of the structural appraisal and the heritage-based conditions proposed in your report is such that the retention of the existing fabric as part of this redevelopment is achievable. Furthermore, despite heritage and landscape objections to the proposal, your officer considers that the development now proposed has responded positively to the three reasons for refusal that formed the basis of the previous determination, with the scaling back of the proposed ancillary building and the extended elements of the farmhouse and farm buildings. Furthermore, whilst the visual impacts of parts of the proposed track access are acknowledged, in other respects the proposed development is considered to be well contained within the landscape by existing features, and as submitted, the access design and the proposed route is considered to represent the best option available to provide access to the restored farmstead. Finally, from me, you'll be pleased to know, through extensive survey work and evidence-based assessment of the existing biodiversity baseline, the proposed biodiversity enhancements have secured a positive recommendation from the Council's ecologist. Accordingly, a positive recommendation as set out in your agenda is now put forward for consideration by councillors. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Withers. Now I'll invite Mrs. Tribe on behalf of the Parish Council to make a presentation. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and councillors. My name is Pamela Tribe, and I'm here as a Parish Councillor representing Longtown Group Parish Council. We are looking at the proposal to develop a derelict historic farmstead in the beautiful Olcan Valley. I was one of the councillors who compiled the Longtown Group Neighbourhood Plan, which gave 4 criteria in respect of historic farmsteads. 1. Does it meet the local need for affordable housing? There is no evidence for this. 2. Does the development ensure the retention or repair of any heritage asset? It is in such a derelict state that it is unclear how much of the heritage building would remain. The neighbourhood plan categorically stated that a building should be restored and not be a new build. Is this a live-work development? There are no plans for any commercial units. It is planned to be a large family dwelling. 4. Does it maintain the integrity of the building? The main extension behind the farmhouse would dominate it, being over twice its size. The hay barn roof would be raised disproportionately to the size of the farmhouse, thus also dominating it. The farmhouse would not maintain its integrity. It is abundantly clear that the applicant is looking to build a new dwelling under the guise of restoring an ancient and historic farmstead. It does not comply with a neighbourhood plan in any of the criteria, either in fact or even the spirit of the plan. The Herefordshire Local Plan Core Strategy is even more specific. RA5 makes it clear that it is not intended to support the rebuilding of rural buildings which have fallen into a derelict state. Buildings should be structurally sound and capable of bona fide conversion without major construction or extension. Last November, our parish council objected to the proposal. I quote, "Our objection is based on these considerations. They include the layout and density of the application, the scale and dominance, the impact on trees, on wildlife and nature conservation, the relevant provisions of the neighbourhood plan, as well as previous planning objections. My parish council has objected unanimously 3 times to this deeply flawed proposal."
Thank you, Mrs. Tribe. Now I invite Mrs. Griffiths, a local resident, to speak in objection to the application. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning. I'm Miriam Griffiths. Thank you for this opportunity to express many objectors' views. Is the case officer's recommendation to support the proposal based on a planning balance, with all material considerations and policies given sufficient weight? Approval is justified by focusing on one policy, LGPC4 of the Neighbourhood Plan. The Parish Council, authors of the Neighbourhood Plan, oppose it on the grounds of LGPC4. 2 key senior internal consultees, Heritage and Landscape Officers, show the proposal does not comply with LGPC4. The Heritage Officer puts non-compliance with policy RA5 at the core and emphasises inappropriate enlargement of the farmstead. Proof that the buildings are structurally sound for restoration is not provided by the last-minute structural appraisal in the view of a historic buildings architect. Aubrey's is prominent in a treasured historic and unique landscape. The inappropriately large, sprawling proposal has enormous negative landscape impact, which is insufficiently weighed in the planning balance. The landscape officer, citing LD1, recommends refusal because new structures in fields away from the traditional farmstead disrupt the historic field and settlement patterns. The present form and size of the farmstead make a positive heritage contribution, whereas the proposed enlargements and additions damage heritage value. A last-minute summary report suggests another local heritage asset, Upper Blaine, is a precedent, but in that case, joining up house and outbuildings and extension of the house were not allowed. Please note, with regard to local wildlife sites, that Herefordshire Council is currently leading and funding a project to protect and conserve local wildlife sites in the county. Serious regulatory questions about sewage and drainage remain unanswered. The case, which supports the principle of development, hangs by a thread, without due weight given to several material policy issues. We urge you, as guardians of our heritage and landscape, to support the conclusions of your own heritage and landscape officers. Thank you.
Thank you. And now can I invite Mr. Gardner, the applicant, to speak in support of the application. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, everybody. We've been visiting the Longtown area with our family for over 40 years, and with your permission, hope to make this 3-bedroom restoration our home. We share the desire to protect the Oldcombe Valley and are determined to secure a sustainable future for Aubrey's. We've put an immense effort into our application to ensure that your planning team have had everything they need to reach a properly informed decision. We took pre-planning advice at the start and have collaborated throughout, agreeing to every requested amendment and report made by the planning officer, who now recommends approval. On the other hand, our approaches to engage constructively with locals have been ignored. The 1921 census shows that over 30 households in the upper reaches of the Oldcombe. Only a handful now remain, the others neglected and left to ruin. There is clear local desire to reverse this in the Longtown Neighbourhood Plan, where it states there is considerable enthusiasm for farmers to build additional dwellings and for the development of redundant, abandoned and derelict buildings. Aubrey's is specifically mentioned in the NDP as a group of redundant buildings worthy of such a return to life, and the structural survey, which was requested very late in the process, clearly demonstrates that their condition is more than suitable. While there have been objections to our scheme, 16 of these come from just 2 households. Others have been encouraged from much further afield. We respect this right to challenge and have addressed every legitimate planning matter raised. However, we cannot be judged on objections not of a planning nature, nor those based on misinformation. In the scheme, the building cluster has an expanded footprint of over 50%, not 700%, incidentally. This modest increase comprises lightweight connections, ensuring a single family use, and a rear extension hidden from view. Under different ownership, and using simple permitted development, a track and an agricultural tin shed of up to 1,500 square metres could be in place, the existing buildings left to ruin. But we are committed to saving Aubrey's. Despite our efforts to date, ruination is undeniably looming for Aubrey's. Almost all objectors agreed to it being brought back to life, but any such scheme would need access. Ours is a low-impact agricultural-style track with a small tractor barn, 3-bay garage in size. Aubrey's land has been overgrazed for hundreds of years. Our scheme demonstrates a 97% improvement in biodiversity. Much has been made of preventing a precedent, but each application must be judged on its own merits and held up against the rigorous NDP, voted in by the majority of the whole community. Nonetheless, the precedent was set for rescuing and repurposing redundant buildings in the valley many years ago, most recently up at Blaine.
Could you just wind up your 3 minutes?
Sure. The immediate next door. We respectfully ask you to endorse your planning officer's recommendation by approving this application.
Now, if you could just take your seats back in the public gallery, please. Thank you. Councillor Engels is the local ward member for this item. He speaks first and then has the right to speak at the end of the meeting. He does not have a vote. He has 10 minutes for a maximum for the opening comments and 5 minutes at the end. Councillor Engels.
Thank you, Chair. Everyone is allowed to have a favourite obscure word, and mine is numinous. It is defined as evoking a heightened sense of the spiritual, can be applied to art or nature. I've felt it a few times in my life, most relevantly in the Olcon Valley. And I am not alone. It is a place that brings out an inner calm, even in seen-it-all travel writers. God's own country, the Sunday Times called it. The views are sublime, wild grey and brown moorlands, where bleating sheep are looked down upon by scudding clouds swept along on endless winds. The Times, the views from the top are cosmic. You climb into Lord of the Rings country with gorse, heather and mysterious riders. An unspoilt river valley, said the Country Life, less poetically, in 1956, and to a remarkable extent, it still is unspoilt. Until perhaps later. I hope some of you felt something of the sublime in between the arduous climb and the planning technicalities at yesterday's site meeting. But even the absentees will recognise it because it's here, our pin-up poster. An amazing picture of a natural amphitheatre with enough room to fill 100 Taylor Swift concerts, but with an audience only of trees and sheep. And it's here in Herefordshire. The valley is essentially invisible from anywhere other than the hills. It's hidden away between Hatterall Ridge and the Cat's Back on the very edge of Wales and the National Park. The Olcon Valley was twice meant to have been given statutory protection long ago, but politics stopped it. The dream and the idea has not gone away yet. Which brings us to Albury's. It is 1,300 feet above sea level, much higher than its neighbours. That made it a very tough place to live and farm. The last tenants, Tom Hyde and his family, left around 1970, and their house gradually decayed, quietly and picturesquely. More than 50 years later, the remains of the house and 25 acres, as I believe, were brought by Mr. Gardner's family. And they drew up their plans to live there, at least, I understand, some of the time. I am 99% sure they would not have got permission to build on a virgin hillside. But our policy RA5 of the Herefordshire Bible offered a glimmer because the cottage was still there. Sort of. There have been so far 3 acts in this drama. In the first, the original mansion the applicants put forward was rejected, with an encouraging try again note from the planning officers. Then came the second version, somewhat scaled down, at which point both the applicants and myself received a letter saying that repurposing old farm buildings was important, and they were minded to approve. And then there was a long silence, which suggested to me unease, in which time applicants, agents and planners came up with the latest version, in which the extensions are still much bigger than Tom Hyde's cottage, and the actual dimensions of that are in dispute by a large amount, depending on how you measure it, but smaller than the before. And on that basis, it comes to this committee with this main policy rating of RA5, which says the existing buildings must be of permanent and substantial construction capable of conversion without major or complete reconstruction. A full structural survey may be required whether this is the case. 2 years passed and there was no survey at all, and suddenly one appeared 36 hours ago. Paid for, and this is not in dispute, by the applicants, commissioned by them. Apparently the survey was on Friday and written over the weekend. There are 18 pages detailing the massive amount that needs to be undertaken, but cheerily concludes that the farmhouse is suitable conversion, i.e. is merely dilapidated and not derelict, which surprisingly enough was what the people who commissioned it wanted, even though the section 4 of this report details that roof, ceiling, floor, walls, you name it, all needed to be replaced, which somewhat explains why we weren't allowed in yesterday. I really feel that this business, this twin event of this report arriving at this stage with no opportunity for anybody else to read it through or have expert view of it, and the whole idea of marking your own homework on your own planning application is really quite out of place in a democratic society. The planning report conclusion rests on only one other policy, LGPC, from the Longtown Group Parish Plan, and you have listened to Mrs. Tribe say that has been misinterpreted, and she wrote it. And that is the extent of the case that has been given. Even if the farmhouse structure passed a truly independent test, this was still going to be totally out of place. Other houses in this valley are located discreetly on the valley floor. This one shouts out far above the valley. Far above the valley. Now, it's not, what's important is the view people will have of it where they walk, which is on the top of the Cat's Back, going round onto the main mountain, where it's still, on certain parts of it, I believe, will be seen jarringly from within the national park. The farmhouse itself being squeezed between its overwhelming modern parts representing modernity and, we have to say, money. There is no support in the valley, and this really isn't NIMBYism because it's in nobody's backyard. It's a very remote place. There are no neighbours in that true definition. It is about protection of the countryside, something that you have heard very little about from this report. There is no local argument. Farmers and everyone else is in step with newer arrivals, all saying no. Increasingly, the whole Golden Valley depends as much on tourism as farming, and the two are symbiotic. An assault on our scenery is an assault on our economy. To this, the planners seem oblivious. And however many changes are made to this application, the beauty of the Olcon Valley, this miraculous survival, will be tarnished for the benefit of one family with no gain for anyone else except the builders who could be clogging up the roads for years. This one-sided report brushes aside the landscape officer, who has said again and again that every version was damaging and in breach of Council's policies, LD1 and LD4, and the Heritage Officer's horror is palpable. It does not, LD1, conserve and enhance the natural, historic, and scenic beauty of an important landscape, and LD4, it will not protect and conserve and where possible enhance heritage assets. If the farmhouse, if it survives, will be there on sufferance. The Heritage Officer, and only 3 weeks ago, negative impact on the prevailing character of a remote, intimate, pastoral landscape with a dramatically rolling topography. The applicants took a chance when they bought this land. There is no obligation on this council to allow them to build there. In a place like this, the scenery must be given preeminence and not the narrow and one-sided way that I believe the council officers have done this. The Olcon Valley is a place that makes visitors feel humble.
I'm afraid, Councillor Engels, you have to wind up. You've gone over 10 minutes.
Okay, well, just let me say, I will come back to various other matters. This is not a rich county, but we have enchanted places, and we must cherish them. And if this council cannot weigh its planning policies in the balance and say, this is what really matters, I really don't understand what we're here for. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll open. Member. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I found the site visit yesterday extremely informative and tiring. Walking up that hill was a struggle, but it was interesting because when we arrived at the site, we looked through the gate and had a presentation from Mr. Withers, and I actually couldn't see the site. I didn't know where it was. And it was only halfway up the hill I then realised that the grey buildings at the top were the application site. I should commend Mr. Withers for his very comprehensive written report and his verbal report yesterday and this morning. There's no doubt that this is a particularly beautiful part of the world. I've never been there before, and I would like to go back again. And it's quite right that we don't allow new builds in places of outstanding natural beauty. However, this is not a new build, it's basically a repurposing or reinstatement of an old existing building, which we've had several before this committee over the years. And we did notice on our drive home yesterday when we drove around all the way around the mountain road, there were several other derelict buildings on our route, which in my view don't really enhance the views of an area of outstanding natural beauty. And I would quite like to see those reinstated as well, but it depends on how they're done. And I understand this one in particular, they will reuse and repurpose the existing stonework. And so from the road, it's possible when if this is allowed, it probably wouldn't be noticeable, certainly by driving past, and unless you were going to stop and lean on the gate and have a look up the hill, you might spot it. But and the other matter is that we were told that this is possibly becoming a listed building, and of course, if I might be right, that listed buildings it's sort of compulsory that they are repaired, or some sort of repairs are made. Not too sure about that. But I think if it was approved, I think it would have little or no adverse effect on either the views from Mountain Road or by the local residents. And with that in mind, I feel I should support the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Symes.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you very much to the Planning Officer for his report and the vital site visit yesterday. It was a real magical mystery tour, as we found, to get to the site. And despite knowing the valley really well, I'd never actually been into the bottom of the valley. I've always walked along the Office Dyke path or along the Cat's Back, and have spent, as Councillor Engel more eloquently explained, that real sense of peace and tranquility, and understanding the importance of places to get away, basically, from modern life. So moving on to the actual site, I unfortunately disagree with Councillor Baker, although I do agree that it's difficult to see the site from the road access, but that is not the predominant viewing point of that site. Because of its positioning on the slope, you see it majority from where people walk along the Cat's Back and other elements there, where they're looking across into the National Park and Offa's Dyke. So, you know, it is a really, really important site and landscape that is viewed. We happened to visit it in the height of summer when the trees were in full leaf. That site is so much more exposed and visible once the leaves are off the trees. It really is quite an exposed position at the height it is on that flank of the valley side. I view the addition of the new build barn particularly problematic, along with the parking area, the associated earthworks and the retaining wall, along with the access track. They nearly double the area of the developed form along with the access track, and I find that this is incongruous to the sloping topography of the site. Vehicles parked in this area will be highly visible with glare and reflection once you've got trees not in leaf. This is out of keeping with the setting and even with proposed landscaping due to the elevations of the surrounding land. As I said, it'll be really visible and I think it will go a long way to undermining people's enjoyment and views from the Olchan Valley top. I did note Councillor Case Officer's reference to the access track and significant pollarding of the trees there, again opening up that kind of traditional hedgerow developed tree line down across there, which is of concern. So I find the application is contrary to policies SD1, SS6 and LD1 of the core strategy. With regard to the main farmhouse and the derelict farm buildings, I very much agree with the heritage officers that the extension, connection, conversion and increase in built form and massing is detrimental to the original form, character, appearance and setting. Furthermore, the ruins are synonymous with and contribute to the appeal of the highly valued landscape. I note the officer's condition regard to external illumination if it was allowed. However, given the amount of glazing with roof lights, kitchen extension link, etc., and significant potential for nighttime visibility with lights on, so I find it contrary to proposals LD4, LD1 of the CS. We then move on to RA5, RA3. Can I come back on that at any point?
Well, a little later, perhaps, when the...
Okay, if anyone else doesn't bring it up, can I come back? Thank you.
Other speakers, please. Councillor Andrews.
I think Councillor Simmons has said a great deal of what I would like to say. I would simply dispute the words restoration. It seemed to me, and I agree I'm not an expert, but the existing derelict farmhouse, it looked to be some puff of wind and the whole place would collapse. I really cannot see that it's going to be a restoration. It is going to be a new build in open countryside.
Thank you, Chair. As the case officer report references, the site is outside the settlement boundary and therefore RA3 applies. RA3 criteria referenced as applying is 4. Sustainable reuse of a redundant or disused building. However, this states where it complies with policy RA5 and leads to an enhancement of its immediate setting. As both the Landscape and Historic Environment Officers state, these proposals do not enhance the setting and therefore RA3 is not supported. However, moving to RA5, thank you. So RA5, 1, Historic Officer comments and Landscape Officer comments indicate criterion 1 is not supported. 3, clear landscape environmental impacts, so criteria 3 is not supported. 4, having seen the building regardless of the last-minute structural survey, some of the buildings are little more than ruins and clearly require major reconstruction. And 5, the proposals to be acceptable to the applicant clearly require extension, ancillary buildings and areas of hard standing that have detrimental impact on the landscape setting, as noted by the Senior Landscape Officer, and adversely affect the character, as noted by the Historic Buildings Officer. Therefore, proposals are contrary to RA3 and RA5. In addition, the NDP, so LGPC 4, 2 and 4 are stated as applying in light of Appendix A, specifying Albury specifically. However, LGPC 4 still requires sensitively designed housing development of historic farmsteads that respect historic character. I don't think this proposal does respect the historic character as stated by the Historic Buildings Officer. Is this a quote? Yeah. Thanks, Steph. Steph's interpretation of this policy is that this is not reinstatement either, but expansion and change of use from predominantly farmstead 2 entirely residential. It also does not meet criteria 1 and 3. Therefore, staff suggests that there are limited benefits to consider in the planning balance that outweigh the harm, and this proposal is contrary to SS1, LGPC4 and SS1.
Thank you. Councillor Hamblin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a difficulty with this one. We have been steered to a certain extent and told that this application was refused on 3 grounds previously. And perhaps we're not on terribly safe ground if we try to refuse it on conditions on matters other than those 3. So I don't know whether we can have a steer on that from the planning officers.
Yes, absolutely. So I think in terms of, obviously we haven't got a recommendation on the proposal on the table at the moment, but in terms of the policies that Councillor Simmons and Councillor Jannard outlined, then they are referenced back to the reasons 1 and 2 on the previous refusal. So I think that it's an assessment of whether or not you think that these proposals in front of you have done enough to come to a different conclusion, essentially. So, you know, you're looking at the heritage and landscape impact and whether or not it complies with RA5, RA3. They're all, you know, you can still make those points in terms of a valid route to go. But it is a case of just saying, well, this is what was refused before. It's not the same scheme, so you're not making the same decision, but you can come to those conclusions, and you are looking at the Heritage and Landscape Officer comments, which have been referenced as well. Any more?
Sorry, yeah, again, I think that's a really helpful summary. That's all right. I guess I just wanted to make the point that from my own interpretation, you know, and what I think I've hopefully set out or tried to in the report, that there is a tension in my mind between the core strategy policies and indeed some of the policies in the neighbourhood development plan, which focus principally on conversion, which is a concept I think we're all quite familiar with, you know, reusing an existing building, and what LGPC4 says in terms of the potential value and benefit of reinstating buildings. That to me infers a greater level of work potentially is suitable that might go beyond pure conversion. And so I hear the concerns about the scale of what's proposed in relation to both the extensions to the farmhouse and the buildings as well as the new build elements. But I'd be concerned if the debate and the discussion goes towards an objection in principle to some form of reinstatement. Now, it might be that in your mind that reinstatement is the house and 3 detached buildings associated with it, but I think to say that this group of buildings is beyond developable value when you look at what LGPC4 says, I think is troubling. But that's not to say that the scale of the alterations that are being proposed isn't an issue. That's really what I wanted to emphasise in terms of looking back at the way the previous applications were assessed.
Councillor Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I'm very sorry that I couldn't be there yesterday. I do know this area quite well, and I have actually walked up that valley, and I've seen this and other dilapidated properties. Can I just say, from a builder's point of view, as was my speciality, and I have restored something as in bad a condition as this. It can be done, and it can be done sensitively. In fact, we were praised by Monmouthshire County Council Planning Department for our reconstruction. And a bit of it was reconstruction, it had to be. What you do, I think this is all coming down to sort of one thing, really. Do we put that beautiful valley in aspic, leave all these redundant farmhouses and let them fall apart, or do we try and sensitively conserve them, put them back? And the only way you can, anybody can afford to put them back is to have it as a domestic house. Once they are converted into domestic house, they will be there for many hundreds of years, probably longer than they've presently been there. It's a very difficult one. So I think this is really, we were stating all sorts of reasons why we should, why we shouldn't, but I think it's a case of your attitude to this very beautiful part of the Herefordshire. Do we keep it in aspect, or do we try and restore it? I think personally we should try and restore it, but there again I'm sort of biased because this is what I used to do. So I think this is something that all the members of this committee want to think about.
Thank you, Chair. Right, thank you. Yes, this is a tricky one to make a decision on, but looking at our visit yesterday, the size of the site is going to increase quite a large proportion of that land. Whereas to me, with RA5, the reuse of rural buildings, you're putting together what is there and reusing those buildings, not adding on additional areas and making it, increasing the size. I think that if we were just talking about restoring the house and the outbuildings as they are, without any additional buildings being put up, it would be an easier decision. But on a personal note, increasing the size by the area that we're talking about, I think goes against RA5. And I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd also like to thank Simon Withers for his very good report and the very well organised site visit yesterday. Those superb views, the magical countryside, made it a site visit that I shall remember for a very long time. I'm not sure at the moment which way I'm going to vote on this application, because I agree with some of the points made by speakers on both sides, but I do note the landscape officer's objection. I think we should take some notice of that, especially based on policies LD1 and LD4. And I also agree with what Councillor Andrews said earlier on about the not so much restoration but new build. But I've also, particularly as I do with all these applications, listened to the views of the Parish Council and notes the long-term neighbourhood development plan and local feeling, which was made very clear when we went on our site visit yesterday, when so many people turned up. It was very good to see so many local people there. But also the local member who spoke so eloquently this morning. I think all these views I shall certainly take into account, but I'm very concerned about possibly spoiling this wonderful valley, even with one particular development. This could lead to others. But on the other hand, I can see the point of not just having derelict buildings scattered about in such wonderful countryside if something better can be done. But at the moment, I haven't quite made up my mind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll go now to Councillor Simmons and then Councillor Baker afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Councillor Thomas for his experience on rebuild work. Do you understand he's done a lot of that? I'm certainly not against, I'm certainly not about preserving this in aspect. And I do recognise that Aubrey's is within the Longtown Neighbourhood Development Plan listed as a site for reinstatement. I will say that again, because where is the planning balance in this? If we were talking about, as Councillor Bolter said, reinstatement of the farmhouse and those buildings without additions, without, you know, cut and fill or cut into form a platform with the new barn element on there, and that it was for local family. That is one of the other requirements of LGPC4, is that it is, you know, supporting low cost local housing. Otherwise we just end up becoming, you know, a playground where we build big expensive houses that people can afford to put, you know, additional glass extensions and elements in, and then we depopulate further our rural economy. And I think it's really important that that is considered. I do not see where the planning balance is in allowing this particular scale and form of development, and it's clearly not what Longtown Parish Council had in mind when they were doing their NDP. So I'd just like to make that point. And on that basis, I would like to recommend a motion for refusal of this application, contrary to the case officer's recommendation, I'm afraid.
The outline of the
rationale, the reasons for refusal. So looking back at the original refusal for the previous application, recognising that this is a different application in terms of scale, but still I feel that it is contrary to LD1, LD4 in my mind, RA3 and 5, SD1, SS1, SS6, LGPC4, and also LGPC 12, A and B.
Right. Is that seconded? Right. That's seconded. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. What I should have said earlier was that this building was erected possibly over 150 years ago. And it looks to me, although we didn't go inside, it looked to be a 2 up, 2 down. And I guarantee it didn't have internal bathroom or internal toilets. And it had the detached farm buildings in order to support the actual farm work. It's not going to be repurposed as a farmhouse, but as a domestic dwelling, but in 21st century conditions, which means there will be internal bathrooms, probably 2, at least 2 internal toilets, and by linking them together, you can actually then use the outside barns as part of your living accommodation, which wasn't even envisaged 150 years ago. We have to be realistic, and the amount of money this will cost to reinstate it, it wouldn't be worthwhile. It wouldn't be financially viable to rebuild it in its current condition with external barns, which what would you use them for? And as a 2 up, 2 down, it wouldn't be worthwhile. And so we have to be realistic. And if people are going to be encouraged to reuse and reinstate these old buildings, they've got to be allowed to do it in 21st century style. Thank you. And can I just reaffirm my recommendation for approval, as I did earlier?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to add my thanks to Mr Withers on the presentation. Really good on the site visit yesterday. Fantastic area, fantastic place, great views, and yeah, really interesting. I think it'd be rather difficult actually for building materials to access that site, as I got stuck behind a cattle lorry going up there for some half an hour, but that's another story. And I think it's very important the presentations that were made by the members of the public referencing the site and the various observations made. Councillor Simmons has made some very, very good points in rejection of this application. However, I think the balance needs to be considered of, do we want to save this building and what's feasible? Councillor Baker's just made some points that I was going to make, that the building itself originally was quite small in size, and the interconnection of the outbuildings to form a family dwelling, I think, is the best source of reuse, repurposing of this particular farmstead, the Aubreys. And I think it's probably the best viable option to maintain it and to retain it. So consequently, I can't support Councillor Simmons's request to reject it. Thank you.
Yeah, I will do. I just want to clarify some points before we go.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Was.
Yeah, just going to put Steph Simmons about my building of this. Can I put my previous hat on as a farming hat? Now, if we got on your threshing barn, you would not have a threshing barn on this site. You cannot grow grain in the Alcombe Valley, I can assure you of that.
Yes.
I very much doubt it was that height originally, but anyway, that's I'm in agreement. This is one of these, to me, even now, it's not black and white. And you know me, I normally made my mind up on the site visit, not anybody else, but it shouldn't do, I know. I wasn't on the site visits, I couldn't. It's a very, very difficult one. It's a most beautiful part of the world. I've been up there many times. I know it very well. I've never actually been up into Albury's farm, but I've walked in front of it. But I also agree what you do. If you're going to maintain these, you have to, as my colleague here said, you're going to have to allow people a little bit of latitude to put a bit of extra in there. And I'm still waiting now to see if which I jump. But the only thing is I do have a problem with this threshing barn, because I think that there wouldn't have been a threshing barn there, but certainly not that height anyway. So.
Great minds speak alike. As other members who visited the site, I laboured that particular point, that there's no such thing as a thrashing barn like that. There hasn't been grain grown within 5 miles, 6 miles of that particular site ever, I imagine. And anyway, a thrashing barn is a totally different thing to what's there. I believe Councillor Woodhull, sorry. Yeah, that was next, and then Councillor Simmons.
Thank you, Chair. My question is quite straightforward. Is this a reinstatement or a modernisation? It is a fine line, isn't it, between the two. It's not really a restoration, because we've all seen evidence of restoration of great works of art or of sculpture, and when it goes wrong, boy, is it wrong, and it makes the papers, and people think it's terrible. And a real restoration restores the original intent. Reinstatement. I need clarification on that. What is a reinstatement, and when does it become modification? Could I get some help with that?
How long is a piece of string?
I don't have my Oxford English Dictionary with me, but I think everyone will have perhaps a view on what reinstatement means to them, what restoration means to them, what conversion means to them. I think that's the difficult balance that I think, from my point of view, being the case officer, we've had to strike, and I think that balance has been touched on in the discussion. That there are the remnants of some rather lovely heritage buildings on that site, and the evidence, as well as the conditions that have been recommended by the historic buildings officer, do demonstrate that those are capable of being retained as part of the restoration, modernisation, call it what you like, of these buildings, and appreciating the views that were well made by the parish council representative. I think that the broader consideration of issues has to have regard to the viability of schemes, and what will achieve the best outcome. Now, again, people will have a different view on what the best outcome is, but what I think I've tried to set out is, after a long, quite extensive process, is a proposal that strikes the right balance in your officer's opinion.
Is there anyone else who actually spoke, who hasn't spoken and wishes to speak? If not, Councillor Simmons.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back to Councillor Thomas, I also have struggled with what reinstatement is, what modernisation is. I think we go back to our officers' comments on this from landscape and heritage and the planning balance, and understanding that this particular proposal, in terms of its scale, with the additional hard standing area, the retaining wall that would be required, the large link extension at the back. I'm not saying that we shouldn't reuse the barns, the threshing barn, the hay store, etc., the cow barn, as residential. It is possible to do that without the additional big link across the back, the steps that link and make a bigger massing there, and without the addition of the storage plant room, new barn, and all that then sense of that access track as well, with required culverting and crossing of rivers, etc., all adds to the sense of that development being the wrong scale for that site. I'm not saying that we shouldn't develop it in line with what LGPC4 had in mind and specifies. Thank you.
Right. I've had no indication of any other speakers. Can I turn to the officers for clarification on a number of points?
It's okay, I think she preempted what I was going to ask anyway. So I was just going to ask for clarification on what elements of the proposal were of particular concern. So Councillor Simmons has just done that for me. She knew what I was going to say before I got there. So I don't think there's anything else for me to clarify on that point.
No, that's all good. Thank you.
Now I'll turn to the local member, Councillor Engels, to sum up.
Sorry. Let me state at once that I am not against repurposing old buildings in the right in the right condition, and nor is anyone, I would say, in the entire Golden Valley. We are acutely aware of the affordable housing that we need across this ward, and I actually do know one or two abandoned buildings in the Old Colne Valley where this might work without significant damage to the environment. But on the other hand, I know this committee does not like references to creating a precedent, but I do also know that other potential developers are watching this case, believing that it will signal gold rush time in the Old Colne Valley for precisely the reasons that you have been talking about. And this is not going to involve affordable houses for local people. If the Old Colne Valley is going to be redeveloped on this basis, what you're suggesting it is that it is going to be it is going to be populated by millionaires and all coming to repurpose old farmsteads and inland sandbanks. There was a reason why these farmhouses were abandoned, because it's a bloody difficult place to live and it's an extremely difficult place to farm in. It is, in winter the sun sets at midday behind the mountain. The roads turn to canals. God knows what they're going to do with the builders' lorries going on them as well. It is a rough place. It is not really a place for this kind of living, which these houses need. Although, mind you, they do have broadband coming off the mountain, which is one plus. This really isn't. You know, this is the wrong place to build a house like that Mr. and Mrs. Gardner want, which they're perfectly entitled to do. It's in the wrong place. I've got here the strategy. There was a book that you would have produced last year on as advice to planners for the environment and building in the countryside. The strategy for the you know the one I mean. You haven't even read it. Yeah, well, it was produced by Herefordshire Council. The strategy for the sandstone upland hills and valleys is to strengthen the distinctive landscape character by conserving the tranquil pastoral landscape, enhancing the ancient field pattern defined by hedgerows, maintaining the mosaic of habitats, and conserving the small-scale built form, sparse settlement pattern, and historic monuments and their settings. Settings matter in the listing of houses. As you may well know, the curtilage, and I'm sure you know, the curtilage is incredibly important. So yes, if this house could be listed now, but it most certainly wouldn't be when the curtilage was covered with a new building. For the moment, the Olcombe Valley remains a place that is magical, thrilling, beautiful, tranquil, and, my word, numinous. I think once this house starts being built, if you allow it, it will change dramatically, and not for the better, and not in the interests of its residents and the wider Golden Valley and the rest of Herefordshire, which has nothing like it, and nor does, of my experience, anywhere else. Thank you.
We've now concluded the debate. We now come to a vote. We have a resolution in front of us from Councillor Simmons and Councillor Gennard seconded. Can I ask those in favour of that resolution, please indicate. Those against? 4. And abstentions? Please show 1 abstention. Then that is carried. Can I now thank you all for your attendance? The meeting is concluded. We will now have a 10-minute break when the members can come back for a briefing on the appeals system and any other items which members wish to raise with the planning department. Thank you.